No one expected it, not even Captain Ibrahim Traoré himself. In the middle of a tense morning in Ouagadougou, with security reports piling high and crises knocking at every door, a single envelope changed everything. Not from a diplomat. Not from a president. But from Lionel Messi. Yes, that Messi. A handwritten letter, straight from Argentina, addressed to the young captain fighting for Burkina Faso's future. What followed wasn't just unexpected, it was history in motion. If you believe in the power of sport, hope, and unexpected friendships, then this story is for you. Like the video. Subscribe. You won't forget what's coming next. If you believe that a small nation can still stand tall against global powers. If you believe that Africa deserves to write its own story, in its own voice, not in someone else's accent. If you've ever seen the fire in Captain Ibrahim Traoré's eyes and felt something shift inside you, then this story belongs to you, too. Like this video. Subscribe to this channel. Not just to support us, but to walk with us. Together, through a rising wave of awakening. Because what began as whispers, is now a silent storm. In the middle of a chaotic morning at the presidential palace in Ouagadougou, with national security on edge, a letter arrived that no one could have predicted. It wasn't marked urgent. It wasn't from the UN or a neighboring president. It was handwritten. And it came from Lionel Messi. Captain Ibrahim Traoré stared in disbelief. A football legend reaching across continents, not to speak politics, but to honor a vision. That vision? Using sport to rebuild a generation. 3 days later, Traoré made the call. His hands trembled slightly as he dialed the international number. On the other end, Messi picked up, in Spanish, then quickly in French. The conversation began formally, but soon turned personal. They spoke of poverty, discipline, war, and dreams. Of how football was more than a game, it was survival. Messi listened, not as a superstar, but as a man who understood what it meant to rise from nothing. Out of that unexpected dialogue came a bold plan, a 3-year partnership between Burkina Faso and the Mes.si Foundation. It included coach training, pitch construction, and scholarships for gifted youth, even in the most remote areas. This wasn't charity. It was strategy. A chance to turn passion into purpose. The youth of Burkina Faso, often forgotten, were now at the center of something global. In a dusty football pitch on the edge of Ouagadougou, Traoré made a surprise visit. The young players froze when they saw him. "Keep playing," he smiled, sitting on a wooden bench. After the session, a boy asked shyly, "Is it true? Messi supports us." Traoré replied, "He doesn't just support you. He believes in you." That belief spread. Girls began joining teams. Parents began to dream. One young girl said, "My parents told me football wasn't for me. Now they're proud, because of this program." Weeks later, the first center of excellence opened in Bobo-Dioulasso. Messi appeared on a screen, speaking directly to Burkinabe youth. This is only the beginning. Then came the news, Messi invited a Burkinabe youth team to a global tournament in Barcelona. Traoré was speechless. The bridge built by one letter had turned into a movement. And in a remote village, as children kicked an official Mes.si Foundation football across a sunlit field, an elder whispered to the president, "You and Messi, you've made dreams possible here." And that's exactly where the story begins, with a letter no one saw coming. Captain Ibrahim Traoré had started his day like any other, early, focused, surrounded by stacks of reports on national defense, youth policy, and the fragile economy of Burkina Faso. Outside, the rising sun lit the city of Ouagadougou in gold. Inside, his office was quiet, until his assistant entered with the Morning Post. There it was. A single envelope with a foreign stamp. It didn't look official. It wasn't from any embassy or international body. Traore almost skipped it. But something about the handwriting made him pause. He opened it. His hands froze. Inside was a handwritten letter, signed Lionel Messi. Captain Ibrahim Traoré read it once. Then again. And again. This wasn't a press release. It wasn't scripted. It was personal. Messi, the football legend, had heard about the president's grassroots sports initiative, and he wasn't just impressed. He was moved. He spoke of how football saved his life, how he saw hope in what Burkina Faso was doing for its youth. In the middle of a day that was supposed to be filled with routine briefings and political tension, Traoré suddenly found himself holding something far more powerful than any speech or summit: recognition, from one of the most admired figures on the planet. No aides. No PR team. Just one man writing to another. And for Captain Ibrahim Traoré, who had been fighting battles most of the world ignored, that letter felt like a silent explosion. A quiet message that maybe, just maybe, the world was finally paying attention. He could have left it there. Framed the letter. Smiled, thanked the universe, and gone on with the daily fight. But Captain Ibrahim Traoré wasn't that kind of man. 3 days after receiving the letter, just past sunset, he returned to his office, alone. The halls of the presidential palace in Ouagadougou were quiet, the city outside dim and restless. On his desk, under a single lamp, the letter from Lionel Messi still sat, its corners worn from rereading. He reached for the telephone. His finger hovered over the international dialing code for Argentina. There was no protocol for this. No diplomatic script. No media team. Just a president with a number, and a decision. He dialed. The phone rang once. Twice. Then someone answered. A quiet voice. Spanish at first, switching quickly to French. Allô? Captain Ibrahim Traoré cleared his throat. Bonsoir. This is Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso. I'm calling about a letter. A pause. Then a breathless, almost disbelieving laugh. Mr. President, I can't believe it's really you. And just like that, the surreal became real. What started as formal niceties soon melted into something far more human. Messi spoke about his humble beginnings in Rosario, his family's struggles, and how football became his lifeline. Traoré listened, then spoke in return, not as a head of state, but as a man who'd also grown up poor, barefoot, and determined. They talked about children. About war. About lost dreams and how sport could bring them back. Captain Ibrahim Traoré described how former conflict zones had been transformed into football fields. Places where guns once ruled were now filled with cheers and makeshift goalposts. Young people who once flirted with extremism now had purpose, teammates, identity. Messi was silent for a moment. Then said, "That's the kind of story the world needs." And for Traoré, it wasn't just a compliment. It was a turning point. In that quiet call, across oceans, languages, and lives, two men realized they shared more than a passion. They shared a mission. And that mission had just found its second heartbeat. What began as a conversation soon turned into something much bigger. For Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the letter had opened a door. The call had lit a fire. But it was the days that followed which turned that fire into a plan. It didn't take long. Just 2 weeks after their first exchange, Messi's foundation sent over a proposal draft, informal, handwritten, just like the letter that started it all. But it was bold. And it was serious. Captain Ibrahim Traoré gathered his key advisors late one evening at the palace. The table was crowded with blueprints, scribbled notes, and satellite images of potential sites across Burkina Faso. His voice was calm, but his eyes were alive. "We are not just building football pitches," he said. "We are building futures." The plan? A 3-year partnership between the Mes.si Foundation and the government of Burkina Faso. 3 pillars. 1. Training local coaches, not just in sport, but in youth development and trauma support. 2. Constructing multi-purpose fields in every region, with a focus on rural and post-conflict areas. 3. Launching a national scholarship scheme for young talents, boys and girls, who showed both skill and character. It was ambitious. Maybe even too ambitious. Burkina Faso had limited infrastructure. Corruption was still a battle. The security situation remained fragile. But Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't flinch. "This," he said, pointing to a photo of children playing barefoot on a dirt pitch, "is where the real revolution begins." Word spread quickly through government halls, and beyond. Sports ministers from neighboring countries began asking questions. Journalists picked up on the rumors. Mes.si's team, now fully engaged, began coordinating with Burkinabe officials. And suddenly, what started as a private gesture became a public commitment. But it wasn't without resistance. Critics called it a distraction. Some said the president should focus on weapons, not whistles. That he was too young. Too idealistic. Too naive to believe football could fix a nation. Captain Ibrahim Traoré heard it all. And answered with action. He doubled the budget for the youth ministry. He ordered unused government land to be repurposed for sport. He brought in community elders, not just for consent, but for collaboration. This wasn't a photo op. It was policy, built from the ground up. When Mes.si heard how seriously the Burkinabe side was taking it, he sent a voice message: "You're doing more than I ever imagined. This isn't just a partnership anymore. It's a movement." Traoré smiled. Because for him, it was never just about football. It was about dignity. Direction. And giving a forgotten generation something they'd never been offered before. A reason to believe. And that's when it all became real, not in boardrooms or briefings, but in the dusty fields where children played barefoot with balls made of plastic bags. Captain Ibrahim Traoré had always believed that change had to be seen to be believed. So, one hot afternoon, without cameras or warning, he left the palace and drove himself to one of the makeshift pitches on the outskirts of Ouagadougou. It was nothing more than a flat, dry stretch of dirt. The goals were 2 piles of bricks. The crowd was a handful of curious onlookers and stray goats. But what he saw there stopped him in his tracks. 2 teams of teenagers, shirts mismatched, shoes optional, were locked in a fierce, beautiful game. No referee. No money. Just raw, unfiltered joy. He stood quietly at the edge, arms crossed, watching. Eventually, someone noticed. "Is that the president?" The match halted. Silence spread. Captain Ibrahim Traoré stepped forward. "Don't stop," he said with a smile. "Keep playing." He sat on a broken wooden bench and stayed there for over an hour, watching every pass, every sprint, every laugh. When it ended, he gathered the young players around him. They stood in a tight semicircle, dusty and breathless. He cleared his throat. "A new program is starting. Soon, you'll have real coaches. Real pitches. Scholarships. And a future beyond these streets." They looked at him, unsure whether to believe it. Then, a boy, perhaps 15, raised his hand. "Is it true?" he asked quietly. "Does Lionel Messi really know about us?" The president's smile returned. Not only does he know, he believes in you. A murmur ran through the group. A girl in the back whispered, even girls. Captain Ibrahim Traoré turned to her. Especially girls. That moment spread like wildfire. Within days, more girls joined neighborhood teams. Parents who once said no were now cheering from the sidelines. In one village, an imam and a priest co-sponsored new goalposts. In another, retired soldiers volunteered to coach. It wasn't perfect. But it was happening. And when Traoré returned to the palace that evening, covered in dust, his heart was fuller than any speech had ever made it. A single question echoed in his mind: what if hope isn't built in silence, but in the noise of children playing where no one thought they could? He looked out at the city and whispered to himself, we're not just changing the game. We're changing the country. And then, the dream stepped out of the dirt. 6 weeks after that dusty football match, Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood under a wide canvas awning in Bobo-Dioulasso, the second largest city in Burkina Faso. The sun was sharp. The air thick with anticipation. Hundreds of children packed the open space, wearing white shirts and hopeful eyes. They weren't here for a politician. They were here for a future. Behind the podium stood the new Center for Sports Excellence, fresh grass, clean facilities, and trainers ready to welcome their first young athletes. But before the ribbon was cut, a giant screen flickered on. And then Mes.si appeared. Live from Barcelona, he addressed the crowd in simple, clear French. This center is only the beginning. Behind every ball, every field, is a shared belief that sport can change lives. That your lives matter. The crowd erupted. Not out of fandom. Out of recognition. Out of finally being seen. Captain Ibrahim Traoré watched from the stage, but his eyes were on the children. Some waved little flags. Some just stared, quiet, wide-eyed, almost afraid to believe this was really happening. After the ceremony, he stayed behind to speak with the first group of trainees. A 13-year-old girl named Aisha pulled gently at his sleeve. "Mr. President," she said, "my parents didn't let me play football. But now, they're proud. Because of you. Because of Mes.si." He knelt beside her. "They should be proud," he whispered. "Because you belong here." Later that night, back at the palace, a message arrived on Traoré's phone. It was Mes.si. A video attached, youth from Argentina, in Mes.si's own foundation, holding signs that read, "We are with Burkina Faso." That simple gesture meant everything. But Mes.si wasn't done. He followed with a call. "We're hosting our annual youth tournament next summer in Barcelona," he said. "I want a team from Burkina Faso there." There was silence on the line. For a moment, Captain Ibrahim Traoré couldn't speak. The idea of sending his nation's children abroad, not as refugees, not as victims, but as equals, hit him like a wave. "We'll be there," he finally said. And in that promise, something shifted. This was no longer just a development program. It was a model. An idea. A signal to the world that partnerships didn't have to come with strings, only with shared values. The next morning, Traoré visited a small village where a new pitch had just opened. He watched as children kicked a bright, official football across the field. An old man approached him. "Excellency," he said, "our children have two heroes now. You. And the footballer from Argentina." Captain Ibrahim Traoré nodded. His voice low. "No," he said. "They have each other. That's what matters now." In the end, it was never just about football. It was never just about one letter, or one center, or even one unlikely phone call across continents. What Captain Ibrahim Traoré and Lionel Messi had sparked was something far more profound, a quiet revolution, stitched together by hope, humility, and shared humanity. Weeks turned into months. More fields opened. More coaches trained. More children, once trapped by the weight of poverty, insecurity, or outdated expectations, began to find themselves through the rhythm of a game. You could hear it in the way the villages cheered. You could see it in the eyes of a girl taking her first shot at goal. You could feel it in the silence when a ball crossed the line and a boy finally realized, "This is for me too." Across Africa, the ripples spread. Ministers from other nations called for guidance. Journalists from Europe came not to criticize, but to learn. And what began as a side note in the headlines of global politics now had its own chapter. But Captain Ibrahim Traoré wasn't chasing applause. He never had. While others looked for legacy in monuments or medals, he found his in motion, in children running, playing, daring to dream without permission. Legacy, he believed, wasn't built in stone. It was built in stories that refused to die. One evening, sitting alone in his office, he watched footage from a village pitch. Two boys shared a pair of shoes between them, switching at halftime. Neither complained. They laughed. They played. They gave it everything. That, Traoré thought, is what the world too often forgets. That dignity doesn't come from wealth. It comes from opportunity. That power isn't found in palaces. It's found in possibility. That Africa's greatest resource isn't gold or oil, it's its children, if only they are seen. Mes.si continued to support from afar. More equipment arrived. A mentorship program began between Burkinabe youth and Argentinian players. But the real victory, as Traoré would later tell his team, was not the scoreboard, it was the shift in belief. We gave them more than football, he said. We gave them permission to imagine. And that may be the most powerful gift of all. So if you're still watching this story, if you followed it from the golden morning in Ouagadougou to that final goal on the village pitch, then maybe, just maybe, this story belongs to you too. Because belief travels. Because hope multiplies. And because somewhere, right now, a child who once felt invisible is lacing up their shoes, and walking onto a pitch that wasn't there yesterday. Thanks to a letter. Thanks to a captain. Thanks to a dream. If you believe that a small nation can still stand tall against the weight of global power. If you believe that Africa has the right, not just to rise, but to write its own story, in its own voice, on its own terms. If you saw the fire in Captain Ibrahim Traoré's eyes and felt it light something inside you, then this isn't just his story. It's yours. Like this video. Subscribe to this channel. Not just to support a man or a mission, but to stand with a movement. Because what started as a whisper on the wind is now a storm sweeping across a continent. A storm of pride. Of purpose. Of possibility. And it's only just begun. This story teaches us that real change doesn't always begin in parliaments or at global summits. It can start with something as simple as a letter. A quiet gesture, an unexpected connection, and the courage to act on it. Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't wait for permission or applause. He responded to a message that most would have framed and forgotten. Instead, he saw it as a door, and walked through it with purpose. The lesson here is about belief. Belief in young people, in forgotten communities, in the value of hope over fear. While the world often tells smaller nations to wait, to be quiet, or to follow, this story proves that leadership doesn't come from size, it comes from conviction. Captain Traoré believed that football could be more than a game. He saw it as a tool for healing, education, and dignity. And he was right. Another powerful message is that dignity doesn't require wealth. Burkina Faso lacked resources, but it had vision. And when that vision met global solidarity, from someone like Mes.si, it became a spark capable of igniting an entire generation. It also reminds us that partnerships don't have to be political or transactional. They can be human. Built on shared values, mutual respect, and the desire to uplift others. Finally, that made this story powerful. It was the simple, shared belief that young people deserve a future they can touch with their own feet. I didn't expect to be moved so deeply by a story that began with a letter. But this wasn't just a story. It was a mirror. A reminder of what leadership looks like when it's stripped of ego and built on purpose. Watching how Captain Ibrahim Traoré responded to Lionel Messi's handwritten note, how he turned a symbolic gesture into tangible change for an entire generation, it shook something in me. What stood out most wasn't the partnership itself, though that in itself is powerful. It was the humility behind it. No spectacle. No self-promotion. Just two men, from two different worlds, choosing to act with integrity and vision. And for once, the spotlight wasn't on politics or profit. It was on young people. On dusty fields. On belief. I kept thinking about that boy who asked if Mes.si really knew about them. And that girl, Aisha, who said her parents had once forbidden her from playing football. These are the voices we don't usually hear. But in this story, they weren't just heard, they were honored. And that says more about the character of Captain Ibrahim Traoré than any title or headline ever could. The world needs more of this. Not just in Africa. Everywhere. We need leaders who listen. Who show up. Who understand that you don't have to be rich to be brave, or famous to be kind. This story reminded me that real legacy isn't about building monuments, it's about building people. And Mes.si, what he did speaks volumes too. He didn't just donate. He engaged. He picked up the phone. He showed the world that sportsmanship isn't just about what happens on the pitch, it's about how you carry that influence off the pitch. His respect for Captain Traoré, and the way he honored Burkina Faso's efforts instead of overshadowing them, was the kind of humility we rarely see from global icons.